All right, we are continuing our study through the book of Revelation here on the listener's commentary. And in this recording, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 7, verse 1, up through chapter 8, verse 1. I know that's a weird kind of a break, and the chapter break is really unfortunate there between the end of chapter 7 and beginning of chapter 8, because chapter 8, verse 1 is the opening of the seventh seal. So we don't really finish the vision of the seven seals until chapter 8, verse 1. That's why we're going all the way from 7:1 to 8:1 in this recording. And as John watches this drama unfold, remember, he's been ushered up into the throne room, up into heaven, and he's watching this drama unfold. And sometimes he's invited to play a role and participate in the drama himself. And he's watching this unfold. And what he's seen is God is on his throne and he's holding a scroll in his right hand with seven seals. No one could open the scroll until the Messiah appears and he's brought into the scene, the Lion from the tribe of Judah, who's actually a slain lamb. He alone has the authority to open that scroll in God's hand. And then John watched as seal by seal, the Lamb opened the scroll, seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, and so on, all the way up to the sixth seal, which we saw in our last recording, which brought us up to the great day of God's wrath. And it ended with a question: who can stand before the great day of God's wrath? Who can stand before the wrath of the Lamb? So before seal number 7 gets opened, the drama shifts. The camera sort of pans over to another scene, if you want to picture it that way. The drama shifts to a scene of those who indeed can stand before the wrath of God and the wrath of the Lamb. And who is that? Well, it's those who celebrate God and his salvation. And so look at chapter 7, verse 1. After this, I saw. Now, we need to learn to read Revelation more theologically than chronologically. So when he says after this, it's not necessarily that this happens like in the flow of history after the sixth seal. It's more John saw this after he saw the opening of the sixth seal. And this is really kind of going along with, well, who can stand? And so after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or any tree. Apparently, it's not super clear, but apparently these 4 winds are like winds of judgment, if you will. They're going to carry out some type of judgment on the earth. But before they do that, something needs to be done first. And what needs to be done first is we need to seal God's people. So look at verse 2. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. So apparently he's coming into the scene of this vision that John is seeing out of the rising of the sun, holding a seal of the living God. We've already talked about the 7 seals on the scroll. Well, this is the same idea. The seal is like a signet ring or something that's going to leave an impress or a mark to say, this is mine. This belongs to me. This comes with my authority. This is under my charge and my care. That's the idea. So this angel is holding the seal of God in his hand. And he called out with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, those 4 angels mentioned in verse 1. And he said to them, don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. This sealing is marking them out as belonging to God and under his care, under his protection. These are my people. In fact, Revelation chapter 14, verse 1 actually clarifies a little bit about this sealing. It says, then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him the 144,000 who had his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. That's the idea here. They're going to be marked with God's name on their foreheads, the Lamb's name on his forehead. In fact, as the drama of the book of Revelation unfolds, as this story moves forward, this marking out of God's people with the seal of God is going to be parodied by the mark of the beast later on in the book of Revelation. So God's people are marked, sealed, and thus protected because they belong to God. Everyone else in the story of Revelation is marked as belonging to the beast. And notice here in verse 3 that we're marking out the bondservants of God. That is, we're marking out all those who belong to God and are faithful to him. So that's what we're about to do. And then verse 4 says, and I heard the number of those who were sealed. So I heard this number of those who were marked out as being bondservants of God. 144,000 sealed. That's the number, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. So 12 tribes times 12,000 equals 144,000. Now, obviously, the question then becomes, well, who are these 144,000? And it's possible. You could say it's literal, right? If we're going to say, oh, this is a literal 144,000 people, well, we would need to be consistent. What I mean by that is if it's a literal 144,000, then it needs to be 144,000 Jewish people, and specifically only 144,000 with exactly 12,000 from each of these exact 12 tribes. It's possible, but here's the problem I have with that. That doesn't really make any sense historically or textually or even like literarily. Here's what I mean by that. Historically, the 10 northern tribes were largely obliterated when they were conquered by Assyria. They actually became kind of the remnants of those 10 tribes became the Samaritan people. They were wiped out and intermarried by Assyrian foreign policy. So they're gone. And Jews in the first century, clear down to today, that you just can't even totally track which tribe you came from. So it doesn't make sense historically. It doesn't make sense textually because this listing of the 12 tribes in verses 5 through 8 is a strange list of the tribes. Nowhere else in the Bible is the 12 tribes listed in this order. And not only that, one of the tribes, the tribe of Dan, is left out of this list here in Revelation. And what's even more interesting is Joseph and Levi are added in, and they're never included in the listing of the tribes anywhere in the Old Testament. So it's not an actual listing of the tribes the way the tribes were actually listed out and the way land was allotted to them in the Old Testament. So it doesn't really make sense textually that it would be a literal 144,000 of the Jewish people. And then just literarily, like as literature, as apocalyptic literature, it doesn't use numbers literally. Numbers intend to communicate not amount or volume, literal numerical amount. Numbers in apocalyptic literature are intended to communicate meaning, symbolic meaning. And so I think it's probably better to see this 144,000 here as a picture of marking out all the people of God, both Jewish people of God and non-Jewish people of God, all the people of God under both testaments. I tend to think that's how it's going. In fact, the 144,000 appear later in the story of Revelation with Jesus, with Christ in heaven. And in that scene there in chapter 14, they're actually described as being redeemed by Christ and followers of Christ. So if it's Jewish people only, it would have to be Jewish Christians, those redeemed by Jesus. But if so, it would still have to be a symbolic number and a symbolic picture, not literal. It couldn't be from these 12 tribes because we don't even have this numbering, and these tribes don't even really exist anymore. So it's possible that it's Jewish Christians, but it's also possible that it's a picture of the complete number of the people of God from both testaments throughout God's history. This is the faithful number of God that have been marked out as belonging to him, who have been faithful to him unto death. And if that's the case, and I tend to think that's the case, that probably explains why John hears the number 144,000, but when he looks to see these 144,000, what he sees is an uncountable number of people in verses 9 and 10. So either way, here's the point. Regardless of how we take this, the point is that this group of people, while they're sealed as God's people, they're under his care, and therefore they can stand before his judgment because of that. The question that was asked at the end of chapter 6. All right, now verses 9 and 10 tells us what John sees. So he heard 144,000. After these things, I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, all the tribes, peoples, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes. Palm branches were in their hands, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So as this scene unfolds before John, remember, he's in the throne room and he's witnessing these visions, these scenes as they're unfolding like a giant drama. So as the scene unfolds, he hears that 144,000 people from various Jewish tribes have been sealed. But what he sees is a countless throng of people from every nation, tribe, people, and language. In other words, he sees a vast multicultural, multi-ethnic crowd of victorious followers of the Lamb. And this sort of thing actually happens several times in Revelation where John hears one thing and sees another thing. In fact, we've already seen one of those way back in chapter 1 where John heard that the lion from the tribe of Judah had been victorious. But when he turns to look, what he sees is a slaughtered lamb, a lamb who had been slain. And I kind of think that's what might be going on here in chapter 7. In other words, what John heard was 144,000. What John sees is this massive multicultural crowd that no one could count. And if that's right, if that's what is happening here, that means that this large crowd in verse 9 is the same people who were sealed in verses 1 through 8. And it's a crowd from every nation and all tribes, peoples, and languages. And they're given white robes, meaning they're washed clean, and palm branches are in their hands. We might miss the significance of that because we think of palm branches only at Palm Sunday, and we don't really associate everything that went with palm branches from the first century. But in that time period, palm branches were a regular symbol of moments of like military victory or other kinds of victory. You see it in coins and inscriptions where people have palm branches, or there's an image of a palm branch that celebrates some great victory. So when it says they have palm branches, what it's saying is these are victors. They're the victors. They're the ones who've overcome, just as Jesus told them to in the messages to the churches. In fact, in Ephesus itself, one of the 7 churches of Asia, you can find an image of the goddess Nike, victory, the goddess of victory, and she's holding a palm branch. And so that's who we're talking about. These are the victors. These are God's faithful people who persevered to the end, and they are celebrating their victory by celebrating the salvation they've been given. And here in this verse, they are before the throne of God, which reminds us that John is still in the throne room. He's still in the same setting as we saw in chapter 4, verse 1. That really hasn't changed. He's just participating in and observing this drama as scene by scene, and the drama unfolds before him. And the throne is in the center, and the 4 living creatures are around the throne, and the elders and myriads of angels are around all of that. And now what's added to this scene is this uncountable multitude from every nation, tribe, language, and tongue. Now that's entered into the throne room as well. And here's this massive crowd, and they're celebrating their salvation and the victory they've been given. And so we see in verse 11, and all the angels were standing around the throne. This myriads and myriads that was mentioned in chapters 4 and 5, they're around the throne. And they're around the elders, and they're around the 4 living creatures. And they all fell on their faces before the throne, and they worshiped God, saying, Amen, blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honor, power, and might belong to our God forever and ever. Amen. And so just as we saw in chapters 4 and 5, where this this angelic host and these elders before the throne worshiped before the throne. Well, now they continue in their worship, but this time they're celebrating God because he has saved his people and he's led them to victory here in this crowd before the throne. And so they worship God and celebrate his greatness and say that he deserves blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honor, and power and might forever and ever. And then, verse 13, one of the elders, those 24 elders around the throne, there in the throne room, actually speaks to John, invites him to participate in the drama here, speaks to John and says to him, "These who are clothed in white robes, this uncountable multitude in white robes, who are they and where have they come from?" And so he asked John this question. John's like, I don't really know. I said to him, "My Lord, you know." And the elder replied to John, "These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So they're followers of Jesus. They've been redeemed by him, and they've come out of the great tribulation. And that phrase, we need to do a little thinking about this phrase, the Great Tribulation. Some see this as referring to a massive time of trial and hardship near the end of history. Some even define it as a specific 7-year period of great tribulation. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the 7-year period idea. I think that's a misunderstanding of Daniel chapter 9. But I do suppose it's possible that there could be a massive increase in hardship and persecution before the great and final day of God's wrath. I just think some of the texts that are used for that are misread and misunderstood. So I'm not sure if it's going to get worse before God comes or not. That's possible. Here's the main thing. In the context of the drama that is the book of Revelation, this is part of a scene that's all about affliction and hardship, right? The 4 horsemen with conquest and war and famine and plague and death, right? Affliction and hardship. And you have the martyrs under the altar, the seal number 5, who are calling out for God to vindicate them. In other words, we're in a setting where it's been all about affliction and hardship and difficulty and tribulation. In fact, the churches that Jesus gives his messages to in chapters 2 and 3, the 7 churches of Asia, and each of those messages, they were already experiencing tribulation. In fact, you can see that word in chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. Antipas has already been killed because of it. In fact, John himself, when he opens the book of Revelation, says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 9, he says that I'm your fellow participant, partaker of the tribulation. And it's definite. He gives a definite article for it. I'm your fellow participant. And so the original readers already thought they were experiencing the tribulation. John himself was participating in it with them. And so I tend to think for the original audience, as they heard this little description here, these are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation, they would have nodded their head saying, I'm feeling it. I already feel like I'm experiencing some of that. We might nod a little bit. Brothers and sisters in other places of the world who are experiencing war and death and maybe even execution and martyrdom for their faith, they would nod their heads and say, I'm right there. I'm experiencing that kind of tribulation along with my brothers and sisters from the 7 churches of Asia. So I think that's what we're talking about here. These are the ones who have come through the tribulation of life in this world and the affliction of life in this world. And maybe it gets worse before the end. I don't know. But they've been faithful all the way to the end. And they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, reminding us that our purity and our cleanness and our redemption is the work of Jesus and his self-sacrifice, the blood of the Lamb. And that's what makes us white and clean. And it also reminds us that our Lord's path to victory was through blood, was through self-sacrifice. His blood is our cleansing. His blood is our victory. And his blood is really the pattern of how we make it to the finish line. And so we too follow him by being faithful unto death. And so this throng, this massive multicultural throng of people are ushered into the rest that God has planned for his people. So listen to verses 15 through 17 and this beautiful picture of the victory and the rest that God has planned for them and for us. It says this, For this reason, they referring back to this massive crowd that can't be counted. For this reason, they are before the throne of God because they've made themselves white and clean in the blood of the Lamb. They've been redeemed by Jesus. They are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will no longer hunger nor thirst, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Oh, what a beautiful picture of rest and victory. They've reached the finish line, and now they're before the throne of God in heaven, and they get to participate in the celebration and the worship in heaven. And notice they serve him day and night. Why? Well, because they're a kingdom of priests, and that's what priests do. They serve God in the temple, and God's going to spread, it says, his tabernacle over them. In other words, the word tabernacle literally just is the word for tent. He's going to welcome them into his tent. And I kind of think of Isaiah chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, where God promises to cover his people with his glory. And the tabernacle is the place where his glory dwells. So they're brought into his tent as he expands his tent to include all this massive crowd, and he welcomes them into his glory. In fact, you get some of the same language we hear here in this passage in Revelation 21, verses 1 through 4, where God dwells among his people, and he wipes away every tear from their eyes, and there's no longer death or anything else, and the new heavens and the new earth has come. You get that same language there as we see here. And so God now has marked his people. He's sealed them out. They have now been faithful unto death. They now stand there in the throne room before the throne of God, and they're given victory and rest. And then chapter 8, verse 1, we get the conclusion to the end of the seven seal vision when the Lamb broke the seventh seal. So remember, seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, all in chapter 6, up to seal 6. Then we get the interlude in chapter 7 where it's like, who can stand before the great day of God's wrath and the wrath of the Lamb? Well, those who are marked as his people, who will be welcomed into his tent, they can stand. Now we get the breaking of the seventh seal. And when the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. And there's this, all the thunderous noise and all the tribulation and difficulty of the drama thus far. There's a pause here in the drama for about a half an hour. Nothing happens there in heaven in the throne room as John just sits there in silence for about a half an hour. Now, before we leave this scene, once again, let me just offer a little reflection. After all this hardship, all this trouble, all this affliction, difficulty, and tribulation, suffering through conquest, war, famine, plague, persecution, even martyrdom, through all of that, the reaction of this massive crowd in heaven is praise and worship, because God's sovereignty has brought them safely through. His sovereignty guaranteed their victory, and now they've arrived. Now they've overcome. Now they have conquered, and they are victorious. And they wave their palm branches in victory to celebrate. We've won, and it was worth it. And here we are, and we're welcomed into the very tabernacle of the living God. And what this scene really pictures for us as it culminates here at the end of chapter 7 and the beginning of chapter 8 is a picture of victory, the likes of which none of us have ever experienced before. God takes his massive arms, he wipes the table clean, and he sets his people, those bearing his name, sets them at his table, brings them into his tent, and welcomes them safely home. God's in charge, and he's brought them safely to their reward. This is ultimate victory. And the realities of suffering and tribulation, all of that, all hardship and difficulty, even feeling overwhelmed by the heat of the sun, all of that is removed. Everything that felt so unfair, everything that was so difficult, it's all done. Never again. And what it reminds the original readers and us is that surely a rest and a victory like that is worth waiting for. Surely a rest and a victory like that is worth living for. It's worth like fighting the good fight. It's worth even suffering and dying for. One ancient Christian, Tertullian, a church father, really kind of lets us into the mind of our brothers and sisters in the days right after the time period of the book of Revelation. Tertullian writes in the decades not long after Revelation was written, and this is what he says: "So we have conquered when we are killed. We escape when we are condemned. When we are surrounded by firewood and burned alive, this is our garb of victory, the robe embroidered with the palm of victory. This is our triumphal chariot." Notice what Tertullian says. When we're killed, even burned alive, that's when we win. Why? Because Tertullian and the Christians in those days, reading Revelation and other books like it, they learned a lesson that they are ushered into the throne room of God himself, and they can grab a palm branch and join the vast, countless crowd of the faithful, and they can sing and dance and celebrate their victory. That's our destiny. Ultimate victory in the presence of God and the Lamb. He guaranteed it, and he fulfilled his word for them in this vision and for us. He's marked them and us as his own. He said he'd vindicate them when the time was right, and he'll do it. He's in charge, and in his sovereignty, he gives them, the original readers, and he gives us, and he gives all the faithful throughout the whole world and throughout all of history. He gives all of us ultimate rest and victory someday. All right, thanks for tuning in to this session of the Listener's Commentary on the New Testament. The Listener's Commentary is a crowd-funded, listener-supported Bible teaching ministry that's made possible by the generous support of dozens and dozens of people just like you. So thanks a ton for your support. And if you want to join the team of supporters, you can do that by going to listenerscommentary.com, clicking the Give button, and it'll redirect you to a page where you can put in a dollar amount. Click the little box if you want to make it monthly that says Make This Monthly, and you can set up a one-time or recurring donation right there. Or you can also sign up for the Study Hub and pick a dollar amount that you want to support this ministry with, and sign up for the Study Hub, another great way to support this ministry. So thanks a ton for your support. God continues to bear good fruit through this ministry and through your prayers and your generosity. So thanks a ton.